Welcome to the sixth video in the series, The Character of the Dictatorship of the Proletariat According to Marx and Engels. Today we'll be going over the 1871 piece by Marx, First Draft of the Civil War in France, which I have subtitled, Proletariat Dynamically Self-Governs by and for itself through Communes in a Social Republic. The dictatorship of the proletariat is fundamentally the self-government of the proletariat in which the proletariat, and only the proletariat among the contending classes, acts for themselves and by themselves. It is strictly not some external group, either managers, elected municipal councils, church heads, or those who own capital and use money to enforce their will, or judges or any other such group making decisions on behalf of the proletariat. It is rather the great mass of people, the proletariat, ruling itself as a class by and for itself, with no mediator between the proletariat and other groups. The commune itself is the political form of the social emancipation of labor from private ownership of the means of production, in order to take the actual management of the social revolution in their own hands, by displacing the state and governmental machinery of the bourgeoisie with their own state and governmental machinery. The proletariat arm themselves and use military force to seize political power. This dictatorship will reject their previous class enemies and their sympathizers from entering into positions of power. History has shown us that opportunists and reactionaries achieve positions through popular magnanimity, sparing them due to their supposed quote-unquote respectability as members of opposition to the most reactionary forces. These people will almost invariably attempt to become members of the new state apparatus and hide reactionary content with revolutionary and populist phrases. Thus, a true republic becomes possible as a social republic, as it excludes the exploiters of the masses and the land, which is also key in repairing the metabolic rift, as landowners are excluded from political position and land is brought directly under the communal interests. The social revolution will either proletarianize the bourgeoisie, or the bourgeoisie will flee. Regardless, the means of production will be left behind. For the most part, the bourgeoisie in modernity have power over, for example, software and the like, which they can potentially sabotage, thus ruining the production of the factories or the distribution systems we rely on as they leave. So we need to keep that in mind. Not all capital is now giant factories that are immovable capital. There's a lot of things that could potentially be sabotaged en masse. The bourgeoisie will attempt to go on proverbial strike, refusing to invest and manage production, and in a false revolution, this will engender a crisis wherein the workers do not get the support needed to continue their labor, and the nascent new state is forced to bring the bourgeoisie to the negotiating table. Under a true revolution, though, a commission is appointed, which organizes and cooperates with delegates of the different trades in order to take over these deserted fixed capitals and put them under the control of the cooperative workmen societies. In addition, mortgages and land ownership are brought to an end, liberating all from rentier relations and removing yet another branch of material control by the bourgeoisie over the proletariat. In the dictatorship, there ceases to be supreme control of any individual or organ, with authority changing hands according to whatever is of import at any given time on the basis of authority of capability, interest, and knowledge, tearing down the basis of bureaucracy. In addition, complete suffrage is established, with national representation being the deliberate expression of the organized communes, where there's not a mere aggregation of individual votes, but rather there is a thoughtful and deliberate expression of the collective will of the communes as organized and self-governing entities using a process of collective decision-making with the communes as the primary actors, whom send delegates to represent the collective will of the communes, to whom their voices are bound to. The communes, as a real expression of the authority of the proletariat, carry out their will, rather than necessarily individual proletarians engaging in a direct democratic process. Though all proletarians had the capacity to establish their class interests in the commune and within the nation as a result. In this new social form, with all social, economical, and political structures transformed and with the communes acting as a collective will of the proletariat, the political nature of organization changes. No longer can political methods of taking advantage of prejudices, either by way of inflaming them or by promising to halt them, be used, and prejudice is done away with. Politics becomes solely about supporting real, living, material interests and wants. And by the way, back to bureaucracy, I'll have an entire section on combating this within the PowerPoint series, so look forward to that. All positions of power have their jargon and red tape removed so that all positions are able to act according to their purpose, and so anyone can be placed in those positions, with them being filled with recallable civil servants that act under continuous supervision while being paid as much as the next workman. These positions themselves are no longer divided between government, police, and prefecture, and do their work publicly and in the most simple and clear manner in broad daylight. The people in these positions are not blamed for their failures and identified as the sole problem, but rather the position is improved so that it can fill it better via robustness of organization, with fallibility recognized and blunders quickly identified and repaired. All positions are staffed by workmen rather than mystifying functionaries. On all levels, the state itself is simplified as much as possible, and the state functions are reduced to as few as possible for the general national purposes. With this removal of all mysticism and payment of all those in state and judiciary organs in line with other workmen's salaries, these positions lose their false transcendent character and come down to earth, with the workmen staffing the positions understanding that they are not above their peers. Meanwhile, the various functionaries needed to keep the state functioning in judicial and executive terms, not legislative, including judges, elected officials, bailiffs, and so on, becomes agents of the commune, and are afforded fixed salaries like all other workmen that are in line with the salaries of the various trades. Within this, tribunals become under general suffrage in order to assert the legal power of the proletariat directly, and legal structures are transformed into communal organs, as rather than a centralized state judiciary, justice is instead administered through the communal organs, which are directly accountable to the people with forms of community-based mediation centers, communal courts of judges elected or appointed by the community and accountable by that community. At the same time, the police bureaucratic apparatus is abolished, and the proletariat as a whole become an armed people's army, as a standing army which defends the government against the citizens is replaced by militias, which defend the citizens against the government, which reject any conscription, while also better defending against foreign aggression, while it ceases the costly upkeep of a standing army, at the same time making desires for expansionary war completely infeasible. In service of this, a central committee is elected and emerges from the organized militias as a military organ, its members with backgrounds of workmen and soldiers representing and being members of the masses. With the establishment of a nation of federations of self-working and self-governing communes across the nation, suppression by surprise or sudden reaction becomes impossible to feasibly carry out. During the course of the dictatorship, bases of ideological power, symbols, and the weapons of terror of the old order are torn down, removing them from positions of economic and political power. Schools, churches, police, all aspects of the superstructure are subjected to direct assault to rebuild them to fit the new society. Symbols of nationalism are destroyed, political prisoners are released, and the new society immediately seeks to live according to its principles. For instance, internationalism. The national background of one workman or another ceases to have meaning, and as a result, foreign nationals can be elected to position. Secular education and society are established actively, and a heavy progressive tax is employed in order to steadily equalize society and bring enough wealth to the state in order to rapidly develop the physical basis of the new society. In addition, the dictatorship creates real proprietorship of the fruits of one's labor, while also maintaining individual remuneration. It combines the fruits of modern production and agronomy, without removing the individual's ability to be an independent producer. Science is also liberated from its class character, while scientists cease being in service to bourgeois social interests, seeking employment within the bourgeois state and to act as allies of capital in order to achieve support for their work. Scientists and the intelligentsia are instead liberated, becoming free agents of thought. Thus, there is rapid development of society intellectually and in terms of the productive forces, which are increasingly brought into the whole of society. The dictatorship itself is a complete negation of the ruling state, as it brings the people power over their own social life, breaks down the machinery of class domination actively in its real-life daily activity, and integrates executive and parliamentary forms of class domination into one, thus ending all illusions about the class character of the state. It reabsorbs state power by society as living forces, and doing so does not reduce the power, but instead wields it as the power of the popular masses who turn that power from oppression to emancipation. The slave getting the gun and turning it on their master to liberate themselves, as opposed to the slave master wielding the gun to maintain power over the slave. Thus, centralization, with power collecting and maximizes, ceases being despotic and dragging the workers under the greater grips of their exploiters, but rather becomes liberatory. It organizes the proletariat according to the proletariat's interests, as there is a continual reduction in competing interests, as everyone's direct interests are achieved and brought in line with each other, and when a new realm of freedom becomes available for all through absolute self-governance in and through society. At all historic developments of the state, from its origin to the dictatorship, it is the organic process of class domination via political guarantees and forms and expression in support of the ruling class, with previous guarantees and forms abandoned any time they threatened the general class domination. While the Commune is fundamentally a liberatory form, which dynamically leads to its own self-abolition, it too acts as this organic process of class domination on behalf of the proletariat. The Commune itself is not the social movement of the working class, but instead the organized means of action of the working class. It does not do away with class struggle, as it is the class domination of the proletariat against all other classes, carried out in the form of the liberation of the proletariat. What the dictatorship can do, however, as part of its principles, is act as the most humane and rational form of organic process, carrying out the transitory phase between capitalism and communism. For example, it begins its emancipation of labor by doing away with the unproductive work of the state, with its bureaucracy, embezzlement, and so on, and the working class itself carries out the real work of the administration both locally and nationally, with servants of the state being paid the same as working men's wages. In one fell swoop, the state becomes immediately much more cheap. There are also different phases of class struggle the dictatorship must pass through, and must be able to dynamically structure itself out in order to carry out that struggle. Early on, the dictatorship is confined to the defense of itself from external and internal counter-revolutionaries, needing to maintain itself physically. In order to defeat their repressors, the permanent negators of their legitimate aspirations and rights, the workers come to the understanding that they have both the duty and absolute right to take action, which can only be assured victory by the seizure of state power by way of dislodging the ruling class from power, so as to save both land and labor, which is the lifeblood of any nation. Despite this, to understand the proletariat's class struggle as a national struggle is to lose sight of reality. Our comrades across borders are proletarians and workers too, and the dictatorship of the proletariat is a world republic even nationally. It accepts all workers. After this early stage, and to some degree overlapping it, the dictatorship ultimately needs to engage in a protracted period, whereby there is an economical transformation that results in a change of distribution and organization of production, wherein the social forms of production already produced by this organized labor are set free from their present class character in such a way that has harmonious national and internal coordination. To this end, as the remaining bourgeois right remains, only to be abolished in the higher phase of communism, there will remain vested interests and class egotisms, which must be suppressed by the dictatorship and later by the commonality. In order to produce this new organization of production, the commune needs to be able to produce social conditions whereby there is spontaneous action or daily life activity of the laws of the social economy of free and associated labor without coercion, with the workers transforming the current form of organized labor and centralized means of labor from the means of class rule and exploitation into forms of free associated labor and social means of production. These new social conditions are products of new social conditions created by the development of the productive forces, fundamentally, but can be aided through the communal form of political organization carried out in a rational and humane manner, wherein institutions and structures that naturally produce cooperation, mutual aid, and collective decision-making amongst all members of society. In this way, free association becomes a key focus that the state attempts to produce, rather than forced association with exploiters, which the bourgeois and feudal order produces, creating a false and predatory unity of oppression and power enforcing association. Rather, there is a unity of brotherhood and political union of society through communal organization. Any sort of unitarian, cosmopolitan rule which suppresses the sensuous character of its membership in order to produce domination is instead creates freedom of association and a desire for association. This unity of the dictatorship of the proletariat is a voluntary association of all local initiatives, acting as a federated social republic which has all the internal advantages of a republican government while having the external force of what amounts to a monarchical one. It is a society made up of societies, which in turn produces a continually and exponentially growing new society. In short, the dictatorship is the dynamic self-governance of the working class, which excludes all external intermediaries or institutions, instead acting for itself and by itself as a class. It seizes political power and smashes all previous governmental machinery and state apparatuses by military force, placing its own which prevent any form of opportunism, while forming a social republic which excludes all those who seek to destroy it. It carries out class struggle against the bourgeoisie internally and externally, defending itself while also seeking international revolution so as to create the conditions for the world republic. Authority is not centralized, but rather shifts according to capability and necessity. And communes act as the fundamental political units with elected delegates working within a highly robust and simplified state that has all functions, including judicial and executive ones, performed openly and under constant public scrutiny, with the delegates being workmen themselves rather than full-time bureaucrats. They have short terms of office as well, breaking up any entrenched power relations. Meanwhile, the police bureaucratic apparatus are replaced with communal organs and militias, and justice is administered through communal organs which are directly accountable to said community. It is a federation and is based on voluntary association of self-governing communes, creating a unified yet decentralized social structure which has internal cooperation and external solidarity. It carries out the cultural revolution as well, dismantling and replacing old structures with new, progressive institutions in line with the principles of communism. This is done in concert with economic and thereby social development, wherein free association and more equal distribution of resources is produced through voluntary, spontaneous relations supported by a state, rather than through coercive force. It manages production and economic transition, adapting to any resistance by its class enemies, while reorganizing production and abolishing all rentier relations, land ownership, and mortgages and the like. Workplaces are continually placed under direct worker control, and continually those that are unable to maintain themselves are placed under appointed commission, with production centralized as cooperative workmen societies. And that is the end of my summary of Marx's first draft of the Civil War in France, written in 1871. If you'd like to go over the quotations I derived the summary from, please feel free to go into the description below and see the link to the Google document. If you'd like to discuss this in greater detail as well, then you could go into the United Marxist Pact Discord server, link there too. Tomorrow we will be going over my summary of the 1891 piece by Engels. The 1871 piece by Marx, The Civil War in France, Chapter 5, rather than the first draft. It's specifically Chapter 5 of the completed work. Thank you for joining me for today's topical summary, and I hope to see you tomorrow.